So now let's talk about pneumothorax, what it is, right? So before we learned about the respiratory system's main function is to breathe, right? And the breathing process takes place through two processes called inspiration, breathing in, and expiration, breathing out, right? And so the way they're regulated is through this pressure gradient that's generated in relation to the atmosphere, right? So what happens whenever that pressure gradient breaches? It disappears, right? So it becomes a problem, right? So the actual gradient leads to a phenomenon called pneumothorax, right? So if I look at my lung right here, right? So if I draw the lung here, you have all the cavities here, and then you have, let's draw the person's body, right? So let's just, this headless man here with this square. Remember, I love the shapes. Some guy comes in, you know, my brother got into a interview at USC, and I told him to be very careful in that area. He's like, no, I'm okay, don't worry about it, right? So let's just say if he was going, you know, not thinking about anything, being boneheaded, and going out into the street, there's, you know, nothing wrong with it, but, you know, it's always have to be cautious, right? So he comes in, some guy comes up to him and says, give me your money, right? He comes up and gives him his money. He's like, you know what, I have a lot of money in here, I worked really hard for this. My life is worth less compared to the money I make, right? So my money is worth more than my entire life. Again, we're looking at a hypothetical situation, right? Comes in here, the robber says, okay, this guy is crazy. He's not giving me his money. I'm hungry. I want to make money. So he comes in, grabs a gun, shoots him in the chest, right? He shoots him in the chest, misses his heart completely. But however, he has this huge puncture that's generated through his rib cage, right? So this puncture opens up. He notices he has severe symptoms of shortness of breath, right? He can't breathe, so dyspnea, which eventually could lead to apnea. And what else did he have? So he notices his pulse is changing. He has this pain in his chest, realizing that if he had, you know, if you were Superman or something and you had this X-ray vision, you can literally see his lung collapse. So this lung here begins to collapse here, right? So now this is his new lungs. And you have all this open cavity here that used to be where his lungs was, right? And then so his blood pressure goes really low because he's not surrounded by any hospital, so he's not being treated immediately. And so then he goes into shock, right? So he goes into shock, and this becomes a problem, very life-threatening, okay? This collapsed lung is the exact condition of pneumothorax. The reason why is this puncture invaded the pleural cavity and allowed for this pressure gradient to come in and out and equilibrize the actual pressure in the thoracic cavity in relation to the outside. This equilibrated nature caused for the lung, the right lung here specifically, or we could look at the left. So if this is the left side, this is the right side here, the left lung to collapse, right? So he has this instance of shortness of breath, and they can eventually lead to instances of hypoxia, even anoxia, because there's no breathing taking place, right? So he was lucky, and there was someone right next to him and who called 911. The 911 people come in, they take it out, and they noticed that there was a lot of air that needs to be removed. So there's procedures that use surgical procedures first that they use. It's called thoracentesis. So where they removed fluid from your centesis, right? So where they remove fluid from your thoracic cavity, right? Sometimes if the puncture was really deep and it cause build up in here, this is called hemothorax. And hemothorax can be very detrimental because it can lead to instances of hemorrhagic anemias, right? Okay, so hemothorax, right? So you have all this blood in your thoracic cavity, right? So imagine you have this fluid right here, and you need to aspirate all of this fluid out because it becomes very dangerous, right? So after this synthesis process, remember, synthesis means removal of some kind of fluid, right? Aspiration of some kind of fluid. And so when they remove the fluid out, what do you do next? You want to equilibrate the pressure, right? So what do? They grab this little incision and they close up this puncture that was created. And when you close up that puncture and you remove all the fluid, so there's no more liquid in here, the actual lungs begin to expand because of the changes in pressure gradients that's generated through this phenomenon, right? And so very lethal condition needs to be immediate medical attention, right? But then it just tells you to not only it's not necessarily caused by trauma. That's one thing. My example was just by trauma. Certain infections can cause it. There could be congenital problems that can lead to pneumothorax. And so there's a lot of other predispositions of people being exposed in order to have this problem. One example was some kind of gun or gun wound or some kind of knife wound. If someone stabs you or someone shoots you in that thoracic cavity and you survive because they missed your heart, right? This can lead to problems with your lungs and eventually lead to pneumothorax.